Right. So for, people, I guess, that aren't putting it really together, you're on the side of the road.
Yep.
Who knows what's going on? The truck's not moving.
Yep.
And in
Yep.
Wyoming, everything's an hour away from each other.
Yep.
So how old were you at the time?
I started when I was 22.
So as a 22-year-old that, unless I'm mistaken, has pretty well none mechanical understanding.
Yep.
You're on the side of the road starting your first business,
Mm.
and your business isn't moving.
Mhm.
You're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So to touch on what Blaine has said is, when I bought the first food truck, I haven't bought a second one yet, so I don't know why I phrased it that way. But when I bought my food truck, I went to go sign paperwork. I'd had it inspected. I went to a dealership. I said, "Hey, can you inspect this? I need everything looked over. I need to know what's wrong with it so I can decide whether or not I'm going
Right.
to buy it." So drove the food truck there. I didn't know what I was listening to, but when we got in to ride in it for the first time, it sounded really loud. Like the engine just sounded like it was like almost like a go-kart, but it was this massive food truck.
Right.
So it was just really loud. And I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, oh, it's really old, so it must be loud. And at this point, I was still thinking I could drive this thing 220 miles, between Montana and Wyoming all the way south. I was totally fine with it. So get it inspected. We go off to lunch. We come back about 2 hours later. I go in. They said, everything's fine. I was like, cool. So I go outside and make the deal with him. And then we go over to the title office and get everything switched over, sign the paperwork. 20 miles down the road, my engine seizes. Sign the paperwork, cut the check. Check was cashed like 25 minutes after I was
Of
Oh,
course.
yeah, he's ready.
Dude,
He's ready.
he was so ready to have that money. And I definitely got conned. I don't know how they missed it in the inspection, but the reason why my engine seized was my radiator cap had been bent, and so all the fluids were shooting out of it. And I didn't notice, and I wasn't paying attention to my engine temperature. So when I finally heard the loud bang and I started getting the smoke coming out of the sides, I looked down and I'm like, is it supposed to be at 270, 280? And no, it's not. So yeah, I get it. Engine's fixed. Everything's good. We get it back to Wheatland, driving it around. Everything's fine. Still not thinking about fixing the food truck because I'm like, well, I just got a new engine. Like everything's got to be fine, whatever. About 4 months later, right after I finished my first week of sales, I'm leaving Laramie, Laramie after, I think, second week of sales. My engine seized a second time. So had to get the engine in place twice.
Coming from Laramie to Wheatland?
Laramie back to Wheatland.
Which, again, in case you don't know the area, is pretty much a dead spot.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
no
traveling
service.
through a pass, and it's just the middle of complete nowhere in a canyon.
Yeah. So when my engine seized the first time, I was absolutely in the middle of nowhere. No phone service, no nothing. Had to walk 2.5 miles to get phone service. The tow guy came to get us, but we had to wait 4 hours before he finally showed up. And when he finally did show up, he pulls in, flips his lights on, backs up to the food truck, gets out, comes over to us, and he's like, well, I'm actually going off shift, so I'll go up to the next town, and I'll call them, and they'll come get you in probably an hour. But he came and drove up to me and talked to me and got out of his tow truck, and the next town was only 2 miles, which is where we wanted to go. So I really don't understand why he didn't just tow me. But we waited 2.5 hours for a tow truck to show up. No one ever did. So we walked 2.5 miles again. My friend and I that were with me at the time walked 2.5 miles to get phone service again to call him, and they were like, no one ever called. So the guy basically just left us there stranded.
Told you someone was coming.
Yeah, told me someone was coming. Then didn't call him.
Man.
Yeah, and so finally we get back and everything's fine. And then flash forward to the second engine season. Yeah, we were right outside the canyon coming back, so it was basically just a super dead zone.
Couldn't ask for any two.
Dude, yeah, just the
situations.
worst. Yeah, at least it wasn't that cold out there.
So
yeah.
did you just have to wait for someone to drive by and stop? And
Yeah, so actually it was weird because one of our people that graduated with us, JC Henyon, drove by and saw me and helped me out.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Yeah, ended up making the phone call for me, so.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, sometimes it works out when it's not working out.
Yep, exactly.